Luxembourg City, January 7, 1945. 1800 hours. The Battle of the Bulge is finally collapsing in the frozen forests, but inside the Allied headquarters, the war is far from over. General Omar Bradley, known to the world as the GI's general, is sitting at his desk. He is a man famous for his calm, almost boring demeanor. He doesn't carry pearl-handled revolvers like Patton. He doesn't wear a beret like Montgomery. He looks like a schoolteacher grading papers. But right now, the pencil in his hand is about to snap. He has just read the transcript of a press conference given that morning by Field Marshal Montgomery. For weeks, Bradley has swallowed insults that would make a lesser man scream. He has watched his armies be taken away, his tactics ridiculed, and his soldiers used as pawns in a British ego trip. But this transcript is different. It is not just an insult. It is a theft of history. Most historians focus on the loud arguments of Patton. But the most dangerous moment for the Allied alliance didn't come with a shout. It came with a whisper. When the quietest man in the room finally decided he had had enough, he reached for the secure phone line to Dwight Eisenhower. He wasn't calling to negotiate. He was calling to quit. The schoolteacher was about to teach the Supreme Commander a lesson. To understand the weight of this refusal, you must understand the man. Omar Bradley was an anomaly in World War II. In an army of peacocks like MacArthur and Patton, Bradley was a sparrow. He looked like a university professor who had wandered onto a battlefield. He wore standard-issue uniforms, ate with enlisted men, and detested the spotlight. He was the soldier's general. He believed that a commander's job was to clear the path for his men, not to chase headlines. For 2 years, from the dust of Tunisia to the hedges of Normandy, Bradley accepted his role as the reliable subordinate. He stepped aside to let Patton take the glory in Sicily. He stepped aside to let Montgomery take the lead in the north. He operated on a simple, almost naive belief. If you do your job well, credit will take care of itself. He trusted the system. He trusted his friend Eisenhower to be the fair referee between the American workhorses and the British show ponies. But Bradley didn't realize that in coalition warfare, silence is often mistaken for weakness. He thought he was being a good ally. Montgomery thought he was being a doormat, and doormats are made to be stepped on. Throughout the bitter winter of 1944, Bradley clung to a singular belief. We are one team. Even as the Germans launched their massive counteroffensive through the Ardennes, shattering the illusion of a quiet front, Bradley tried to maintain his composure. He knew the alliance was fragile. He knew Churchill and Roosevelt were watching. He suppressed his ego for the greater good. When Patton raged about British interference, Bradley calmed him down. When the press asked leading questions, Bradley gave diplomatic answers. He genuinely believed that defeating Germany was the only priority, and that petty squabbles over command boundaries were distractions. He assumed that Montgomery, for all his arrogance, felt the same way. He assumed that when American blood was spilling on the snow, the British Field Marshal would treat the crisis with the solemn respect it deserved. It was a belief born of American optimism, and it was about to be dismantled piece by the cold machinery of British ambition. The betrayal didn't start with a speech. It started with a map. The first crack in Bradley's resolve appeared on the night of December 20th, 1944. The German panzer offensive had driven a physical wedge deep into the American lines, severing communications between Bradley's headquarters in Luxembourg and his northern armies. Eisenhower, citing communication paralysis, made a fateful call. He ordered the transfer of the U.S. First Army and the U.S. Ninth Army to Montgomery's 21st Army Group. In a single administrative stroke, Bradley lost command of over 200,000 American soldiers, 2/3 of his combat power. He was stripped of elite divisions he had trained since D-Day. Overnight, the commander of the largest American force in Europe was reduced to leading only Patton's Third Army. It was a demotion in everything but name. Bradley protested that his radio links were still functioning, but the decision stood. He was forced to hand over his men to a rival who openly despised American tactics. And this was only the beginning. The second crack was personal. On December 25th, while American troops froze in foxholes, Montgomery arrived to inspect his new command. He came late, driven in a polished Rolls-Royce, wearing a pristine uniform that stood in sharp contrast to the mud-caked Americans. His first act was to cancel the American counterattack. Plans prepared by Bradley and Hodges were dismissed, replaced with cautious withdrawals and defensive tidying. The decision delayed the Allied counteroffensive by nearly 2 weeks, allowing German forces to regroup. To Bradley, watching from the sidelines, this wasn't caution. It was professional malpractice. But the deepest insult came from a microphone. On January 7, 1945, the butcher's bill of the Battle of the Bulge sat on Bradley's desk. Tens of thousands of American casualties. Then he heard Montgomery's press conference. For 30 minutes, Montgomery rewrote history, portraying the battle as a tidy British operation and claiming credit for a victory bought almost entirely with American blood. To Bradley, it was stolen valor on an industrial scale. The room in Luxembourg headquarters fell silent. Bradley didn't shout. He didn't rage. Instead, a terrifying calm settled over him. He picked up the secure line to Eisenhower. "You have a choice to make," he said quietly. "I cannot serve under Montgomery. If he commands American troops again, you can send me home." It was a binary ultimatum. Him or me. In that frozen moment, the subordinate died, and the commander was born. Part 2, Eisenhower's choice. The silence on the other end of the secure line stretched on. Dwight D. Eisenhower did not respond immediately, and for perhaps the first time since Normandy, the Supreme Commander felt something unfamiliar. Fear. Not of the Germans, not of Hitler's collapsing Reich, but of losing the men who actually held his army together. Eisenhower understood exactly what Bradley was saying. This was not a tantrum. This was not a negotiation tactic. Omar Bradley was offering to walk away from the largest war in human history rather than allow American soldiers to be commanded by a man he no longer trusted. And worse still, I knew Bradley meant it. For years, Eisenhower had balanced egos the way a bomb disposal expert balances wires. Patton's volatility. Montgomery's arrogance. Churchill's political pressure. Roosevelt's expectations. Eisenhower had survived by compromise, by giving everyone just enough to keep the alliance from cracking. But Bradley's ultimatum shattered that strategy. There was no compromise left. If Bradley resigned, the consequences would be catastrophic. The American public would demand answers. Congress would erupt, and the carefully constructed illusion of Allied unity would collapse overnight. Eisenhower wasn't just choosing between two generals. He was choosing between diplomacy and command authority. As Eisenhower sat alone, replaying the words in his head, another call came through. This one was predictable. George S. Patton. Patton didn't bother with pleasantries. He never did. "Tell him to go to hell, Brad," Patton roared. "I'll quit with you. I'll pack my bags tonight. Let's go home and tell the truth." This was the nightmare scenario Eisenhower had always feared. Not German tanks, but American generals united against Allied command policy. If Patton and Bradley walked, the entire American command structure in Europe would implode. There would be no replacing them. No amount of British diplomacy could fix that. The rebellion was quiet, but it was real. Word spread rapidly through senior American staff. Officers who had remained silent for months now spoke openly. Montgomery's caution was killing momentum. His press conference had crossed a line. His behavior was no longer tolerated. The Americans had reached their limit. Eisenhower finally understood the truth he had been avoiding. Appeasing British pride had come at the expense of American blood. Montgomery believed that command was about control. Eisenhower had believed it was about balance. Bradley had just proven it was about trust. The next move Eisenhower made would define not only the end of the war, but his legacy. And Eisenhower chose Bradley. 10 days later, without fanfare, without ceremony, Eisenhower redrew the map. The U.S. First Army was returned to Bradley's control, weeks earlier than Montgomery had planned. No apology was issued. No public reprimand followed. But the message was unmistakable. Montgomery had been sidelined. Bradley did not celebrate. He didn't give a speech. He didn't leak anything to the press. He simply went back to work, with a colder edge than anyone had ever seen before. Unshackled from British oversight, Bradley unleashed the American war machine. Orders that once took days were now issued in hours. American divisions moved fast, aggressively, and independently. Bradley stopped asking for permission. He stopped waiting for consensus. When Montgomery requested coordination, Bradley delayed. When Monty asked for support, Bradley focused south and east, toward Germany itself. The alliance still existed on paper. In reality, the Americans were now fighting their own war. And then came the moment that proved everything. March 1945. The Rhine River, the final natural barrier protecting the German heartland. Montgomery was preparing his masterpiece, a massive, meticulously planned river crossing. Weeks of preparation, thousands of artillery pieces, mountains of supplies. He wanted one thing above all else, to be the first Allied commander across the Rhine. He demanded that all Allied operations pause to support his grand offensive. Bradley did not agree. When elements of the U.S. 9th Armored Division discovered the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen still standing, intact and undefended, Bradley made the decision Montgomery never would have dared to make. He didn't call Eisenhower. He didn't consult Montgomery. He didn't wait. He gave a single order: get across. American troops poured over the bridge under fire. Engineers raced to secure it before the Germans could destroy it. Within hours, the Americans had a bridgehead east of the Rhine, something Montgomery had planned for weeks but had not yet achieved. By the time Montgomery launched his perfectly rehearsed Operation Plunder, Bradley already had 4 divisions across the river. The humiliation was total. Montgomery was furious, but powerless. The success was undeniable. The Americans had done what Montgomery never could: move fast, trust subordinates, and exploit opportunity without waiting for permission. The crossing at Remagen shortened the war by weeks. It was Bradley's answer to the press conference. Not spoken, but delivered in steel and concrete. From that moment on, the relationship between Bradley and Montgomery was finished. Professional, cold, distant. Bradley coordinated with the British only when explicitly ordered to do so. He guarded his plans carefully, fearing Montgomery would slow them down to reclaim relevance. The good ally was gone. In his place stood a commander who had learned the hardest lesson of coalition warfare. Unity cannot be built on humiliation. When Victory Day came, they stood together for the cameras. Flags waved. Smiles were exchanged. But behind the scenes, the trust was gone forever. Omar Bradley is remembered as the GI's general because he looked like an ordinary man. But his greatest act was not on a battlefield. It was a refusal, spoken calmly, quietly, and without apology. Humility is a virtue, but self-respect is a requirement. And when that line is crossed, even the quietest man must stand up and say, "Enough."